Chapter 1. Old Cracks and the Day Everything Collapsed. My name is Evelyn Hart, 35, and for years I believed loyalty could hold a family together. I paid their hospital bills, covered my brother's rent, bought my parents a home so they would never feel insecure again. I worked late nights building a business from nothing, thinking my success would lift all of us. But somewhere along the way, they stopped seeing me as a daughter and started seeing me as a resource. I did not understand how far that belief had gone until the day my phone rang and someone told me my cabin was being torn apart. And I saw the photos of my own parents standing with a construction crew using a forged version of my signature to take what I built. That was when I learned that love can blind you, but betrayal makes you see everything. By June of 2024, I like to think I had my life under control. I was 35, I owned a small creative agency in downtown Portland called Northline Creative, and that morning I was pacing in front of the conference room screen, rehearsing the opening of a pitch that could carry us through the next year. Jason Cole, my chief financial officer, leaned in the doorway with his tablet, reminding me that the projection slide still needed a final adjustment. I nodded, trying to calm my breathing the way I always did before big presentations. My phone buzzed on the table. The number was from the Lake District. I almost let it ring out. Then a familiar pull tightened in my chest. I picked up. It was Leonard Price, my elderly neighbor at Silver Pine Lake. His voice wavered as he asked if I had recently sold the cabin. I told him no. He hesitated, then said a construction crew was taking down one of my exterior walls. He apologized, said he was not sure whether to call, then promised to send photos. Seconds later, the images arrived. I opened them and felt the room tilt. A whole stretch of siding was gone, exposing pale studs to the daylight. Lumber leaned against the deck rail. A Summit Ridge construction truck sat in the gravel. And standing in my yard as if they owned the place were my parents, Frank and Lorna, beside my brother Tyler and his wife Megan. They were not surprised, not hiding, not confused. They were directing the workers. A tight pressure built behind my ribs. It was not just the shock of what I saw. It was the instant collision of nearly a decade of memories. I had paid my mother's hospital bills in 2015 without hesitation. I had emptied my savings to cover Tyler and Megan's overdue rent in 2017. I had wired the down payment from my father's truck in 2021 because he said he needed it to keep working. I had done all of it quietly, telling myself that being a daughter meant stepping in. Somewhere along the way, that had stopped being help and started being expectation. I did not remember walking to Jason's office, only that I found myself standing in his doorway, telling him I had an emergency at the lake. His eyebrows rose, but he saw my face and immediately said he would stall the Whitfield team. I thanked him, grabbed my keys, and left. The drive towards Silver Pine Lake usually helped me breathe. Not that day. Every mile felt thick. I kept seeing the photos Leonard had sent. My parents standing in front of my cabin like they were unveiling a project they had every right to change. My name, my money, my property, treated like a communal account. When I turned onto the gravel road that hugged the lake, my stomach tightened. The cabin appeared between the trees, a familiar shape now marred by raw wood and open framing. I parked behind a Summit Ridge construction truck and stepped out. The air smelled like sawdust and damp pine. My father noticed me first. He lowered his clipboard and sighed as if I had interrupted an important task. Tyler gave a casual nod, as if seeing me there made perfect sense. Megan shifted their son on her hip and looked up at the exposed wall with something like pride. My mother stood close to my father, hands clasped tightly, waiting for me to speak. I asked what they were doing. Tyler answered before anyone else. He said they were opening up the living area so it could fit a real family. Megan added that I barely came to the cabin, that I lived alone in Portland and was doing fine financially, and that it would be wasteful to leave a cabin unused. My father finished it off by saying a daughter did not need that much property when her family could put it to better use. Their words hung in the air with the smell of cut lumber. I looked through the open studs and saw the lake glittering beyond. Something inside me shifted. This was not impulsive. Crews did not show up without permission. Paperwork had been signed, decisions had been made, and not one of them had involved calling me. The old version of me might have tried to reason, to make it into a misunderstanding we could untangle. That instinct felt distant now. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. I simply said I had to leave, turned, and walked back to my car. Voices rose behind me, my mother calling my name, Tyler asking why I was upset, my father muttering that I was being dramatic. None of it stopped me. I opened the car door, sat down, and closed it slowly. The cabin looked different through the windshield. Not just damaged, but claimed. For 6 years, that cabin had been the one thing in my life untouched by anyone else's needs. The one space where I felt like I knew my place. Chapter 2. The legal path opens. Forgery and double pressure. By the time I pulled out of the driveway, my hands had stopped shaking. The anger was still there, coiled low in my chest, but it felt different from every other time. It was not scrambling or panicked, it was focused. I started the engine, and instead of heading straight back to Portland, I opened the contacts on my phone and scrolled to a name I almost never used. Clara Dorsey picked up on the second ring. I could hear traffic in the background and a keyboard going somewhere near her. She said my name and asked if everything was all right. I told her I needed to talk to her about the cabin at Silver Pine Lake and about my family doing something there without my consent. I did not try to make it sound less serious than it was. She knew about the cabin. She had reviewed the title work when I bought it in 2018. She told me to come by her office as soon as I could get back into the city. Her voice was calm in the way that people sound when they deal with emergencies for a living. It steadied me more than I wanted to admit. The drive back to Portland felt shorter than the drive out. My mind kept cycling through the image Leonard had sent to my phone. The missing wall, the truck in the drive, my parents standing there like they had always belonged. Every time I thought of it, another memory tried to attach to it, another moment when I had said yes to something I did not really want to do. Clara worked in a brick building a few blocks from the courthouse. Her office was on the 3rd floor, full of case files and clean white walls. She was about my age, had gone to school with my roommate in college, and she had the kind of sharp, direct eyes that made you sit up a little straighter. I sat across from her desk and slid my phone over so she could see the photos. She studied each image carefully, swiping through them one by one. She asked me to walk her through the history of the property, when I had bought it, whether anyone else was on the title. I told her the cabin had been in my name alone since closing, and I had never given written permission for any changes. She nodded slowly and said that where a house sits, in which county it is in, matters for details, but the basics are the same across the state. You do not begin tearing down walls on a property you do not own without permission from the owner. If there is no written consent, that is a problem. If there is paperwork claiming consent, they should have shown it to me first. She asked if anyone in my family had mentioned hiring a contractor. I told her no. They had never asked, never hinted, never said a word about wanting to move into the cabin or expand it. The last time my mother had mentioned the lake was to tell me I should invite them up more often. That was it. Clara leaned back and tapped a finger against the edge of my phone. If a company was doing that level of demolition, she said, they would normally insist on seeing signed authorization. She told me that it was very possible someone had signed my name on something without asking me, and that was not a minor issue. She wanted samples of my signature so she could compare if we got a copy of whatever they used. I opened my bag and pulled out an old file folder I had thrown together when I first started the business. Inside were copies of a lease, a bank account application, and some vendor agreements. Each had my name at the bottom, handwritten from different years of my adult life. I laid them out on the desk. Seeing my own signature repeated like that made me feel oddly exposed. Before Clara could say anything else, my phone lit up again, buzzing insistently against the wood. It was the office. I stared at it for a second, already knowing who it would be. I stepped into the hallway to answer. It was indeed Linda. Her voice was polite but tight. She said her team had been waiting in our conference room that morning and that Jason had told them I had a family emergency. She wanted to know if everything was all right and whether we were still serious about taking on their account. I told her I was sorry, that something urgent had happened at my property near the lake, that it was not a health issue, but it needed my immediate attention. I promised we would reschedule within the week, and that the deck she had already seen represented work I fully stood behind. There was a small pause where I could hear her weighing my words against her knowledge of how businesses usually behave. Then she said she understood, that life happened, and that we would talk soon. When I went back into Clara's office, she was looking at my signatures, lined up side by side. She said they were consistent enough that a forgery would stand out if someone had done a lazy job. Then she said the next step should be to talk to the contractor. If Summit Ridge Construction was involved, they would either have a legitimate document or something I'd never seen before. We drove out together in Clara's car so I could respond to emails on the way. She joked lightly that nothing made a contractor more nervous than walking in with a lawyer, and I felt my mouth twitch in what was almost a smile. The Summit Ridge offices sat in a low industrial park on the edge of town, their logo painted across the side of a metal building. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and printer ink. A receptionist led us to a small meeting room with a table, 2 chairs, and a wall of file cabinets. A man in his 40s, with a worn denim shirt and neat hair, introduced himself as Dan Miller, project manager. Clara let me speak first. I told Dan my name and that I owned a cabin at Silver Pine Lake where his crew was currently working. I tried to keep my voice even. He looked a little wary, but not yet alarmed. He said his understanding was that the work had been authorized by the owner and that their crew did not start without signatures. He disappeared for a moment and came back with a thick folder. Inside were printed plans, notes from site visits, and near the top, a single page labeled in bold letters that his eyes skimmed without thinking. He turned it around toward us so we could see. It was a simple document granting temporary authority to authorize construction and structural changes on the property. At the bottom was my name, written in a version of my handwriting that almost fooled me at first glance. Almost. The first thing that hit me was that my last name slanted a little too sharply. The second was that the loop on the E was wrong. I stared at it and felt a kind of cold disgust settle on me. Someone had sat down with a pen and tried to be me. Clara didn't need more than a heartbeat. She asked Dan when the document had been signed and who had brought it in. He checked the date printed under the signature, a date just 2 weeks before, and said that my father had come in with it, that he said I was busy in the city and he was handling the details. Clara pointed out, calmly, specific features of the signature that did not match the sample she had seen that morning. She explained that if this document was presented as genuine and used to authorize structural changes, then there was a serious problem. She did not raise her voice, but every word seemed to tighten the air in the room. Dan's face went from polite to pale. He looked between the paper and me and then back at Clara.
He asked if I was saying I had never signed that document. I told him I had not, that I had never even known there was a plan to alter the cabin. My last communication with my parents about the place was months ago, when my mother had asked if they could borrow the dock for a weekend barbecue. The realization hit him in real time. He ran a hand over his mouth and swore softly under his breath. He said his crew would stop work immediately, that he would call the foreman at the lake as soon as we left the room. He started to mention how his company had relied in good faith on the paperwork they had been given, then caught himself, realizing that did not make the legal risk disappear. We walked out into the parking lot, and I leaned against Clara's car while she made a note on her phone. My own phone buzzed in my pocket again. I pulled it out and saw a name I had not seen in a long time. It was a message from Sharon Green, my mother's cousin who lived back in our hometown. She wrote to say I had heard I was putting my parents through hell again, that they were heartbroken, that I needed to stop making everything about money and remember who had raised me. I stared at the text until the words blurred. In the time it had taken me to drive to the lake and back, they had already spun some story and sent it out down the family line. I could almost hear the conversations happening in living rooms and kitchens hundreds of miles away. Evelyn is at it again. Evelyn is ungrateful. Evelyn thinks she is better than everyone now. Clara asked me if I was all right. I showed her the message. She read it and then shrugged in a way that was more tired than dismissive. This is what people do when they know they were wrong and don't want to look at it. They rewrite the story before the truth catches up to them. Back in Portland, we went to my apartment instead of the office. It felt safer
To spread everything out, somewhere my parents had never set foot. Clara cleared my dining table, and we started building what she called our war table. We laid out the forged authorization from Summit Ridge, the copies of my real signatures, photos of the damaged cabin, the deed showing I was the sole owner. I pulled up bank statements on my laptop, highlighting transfers for hospital bills in 2015, overdue rent in 2017, the truck down payment in 2021, a half dozen smaller rescues in between. 8 years of bailing them out in different amounts, all adding up to a picture I had never let myself see this clearly. Clara worked methodically. She grouped evidence into piles and explained in plain terms what each piece meant. The forgery, she said, could be treated as a felony if we wanted to press it. Presenting it to a contractor and allowing them to act on it made it worse. The damage to the cabin gave grounds for civil claims, including full repair and possibly additional costs. Then she shifted to something that made my stomach twist. She reminded me that the house my parents were living in now, the one in the quiet neighborhood near the park, was in my name as well. I had bought it in 2019 when they said their renting days were over and they needed stability. I had never charged them a cent in rent. If I wanted to, Clara said, I could serve them with an eviction notice in addition to demanding that they pay for the damages. It would be entirely within my rights. It would also be brutal in a way that made the girl inside me, the one who still wanted to be a good daughter, flinch. I looked down at the table. Papers that once represented good intentions and family loyalty now looked like a trail of evidence in a case file. It occurred to me that what was sitting in front of me was more than a series of personal disappointments. It was a pattern. It was a choice they had made, over and over, every time they decided my life was something they could spend for their own comfort. The realization settled in my chest like a weight, and at the same time, like air. This was not a spat. It was not an overreaction or a misunderstanding. It was a violation. And for the first time, I had proof, lined up in neat rows, ready to be used if I chose to. Chapter 3. The living room turns into a courtroom. The breaking point. The next morning, my phone rang while I was standing at the kitchen counter, staring at the war table Clara and I had built out of my life. It was my mother. Her voice was soft, too soft, the way she sounded when she was about to ask for something enormous and try to make it sound small. She said, "Evie, your father wants to talk things through. We do not want this to get ugly. Can you come by the house and we will all sit down like adults?" She meant the house in Maple Grove, the one I had bought in 2019, the one they called home like it had always been theirs. I paused just long enough for her to feel it, then said, "I will come. Clara is coming too." There was a tight silence on the other end, surprise and a hint of offense blending together. "Your lawyer," my mother said. "You need a lawyer to talk to your own family?" "I need someone there who understands what has already happened," I answered. She sighed and said she would have coffee ready, as if this were a casual visit. Later I would hear from Megan that the morning in that house did not start with coffee. She would tell me in a low, embarrassed voice that Tyler had been pacing the living room, bills spread on the table, while she tried to calm him down. He had snapped that they could not afford first and last month rent anywhere decent, that the cabin was their only chance at stability. She had told him he should have thought of that before signing anything for his father. They had gone back and forth until my mother yelled from the kitchen for them to stop, that Evelyn was on her way. By the time Clara and I pulled up in front of the small gray house, the street in Maple Grove was quiet and ordinary. Lawns trimmed, flags on a few porches, a delivery van turning the corner. I sat in the passenger seat for an extra few seconds, feeling the old instincts clawing at me, the ones that said turn around, smooth it over, keep the peace. Clara watched me and asked in a calm voice, "You ready?" I nodded and got out of the car. My father opened the door before we knocked. He looked like he always did in the mornings, flannel shirt, jeans, the faint smell of coffee and engine oil clinging to him. If there was any guilt in his eyes, he hid it well. He looked at Clara and his mouth tightened. "You brought a show," he said. "Is that really necessary?" "It is," I told him. He stepped back and let us in. The living room had that familiar mix of old furniture and my money. The couch was the one I helped pick out when I bought the house. The television was newer, a flat screen I knew they did not pay for. On the coffee table sat a plate of store bakery donuts, untouched. My mother stood near the far wall, twisting a dish towel in her hands. Tyler sat hunched on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, eyes darting between me and my father. Megan was next to him, their son asleep in her lap, cheeks flushed. On the side table, my phone buzzed, but it wasn't mine. Sharon Green's face lit up from another device propped on a stack of magazines, waiting to be answered. "What is going on over there?" Sharon Green's face lit up from another device propped on a stack of magazines, waiting to be answered. "What is going on over there?" Sharon Green's voice boomed into the room from the side table. "Frank? Lorna? Are you all right? Evelyn, what are you doing to them now?" No one answered her. Clara reached into her folder again and placed more pages on the table. Photos of the cabin with the wall torn open. The written estimate listing $17,800 in damage and repair costs. Screenshots of my transfers for hospital bills, back rent, truck payments going back to 2015. I saw my life in ink. It was like standing outside a building and seeing each floor lit up at once. Megan shifted uncomfortably. Tyler scanned the numbers and his jaw clenched. "You kept track of all this?" I answered, "Someone had to." For a long moment, the room was full of paper and breathing. No one moved. Even Sharon went quiet on the screen, taking in the images she could see. The air felt heavy, as if something important was hanging there, waiting to fall. My father broke it. He shoved the forge authorization aside and looked at me, anger pushing through the thin layer of restraint. "You wouldn't even have all this if it were not for us. We did our best with what we had. That cabin, this house, your fancy life, you made that because we raised you. A daughter doesn't understand property the way her parents do.
We are the ones who need a home. It landed like every small dismissal I had swallowed since I was a teenager, condensed into one sentence. It wasn't just about the cabin. It was about every time my work, my choices, my boundaries had been treated like something secondary, something that could be moved around to make room for them. I felt the hurt, sharp and familiar, and then I felt it cool into something else. I understand enough, I said. I understand that I have been paying to clean up other people's messes for almost 10 years. I understand that I bought this house so you could live here without worrying about rent, and you signed my name on a legal document without even asking. I helped because I wanted to, not because I owed you, and you treated me like a financial plan, not a daughter. My mother started to cry. Big, loud sobs that had worked on me for most of my life. "We are your family," she said. "All we have is each other. You can't just throw us away." Clara spoke for the first time in several minutes. No one is being thrown anywhere today, but things are going to change. She took up the last set of papers from her folder. This time, it wasn't a copy, it was the original notice prepared for the house in Maple Grove. "This is a formal notice to end your tenancy," she said. "Evelyn is the legal owner of this property. You have 30 days to make other arrangements." Tyler shot to his feet. "You are evicting your own parents?" he shouted at me. "Are you kidding me?" Megan hissed something under her breath about me always thinking I was better than them. Her cheeks were flushed, eyes bright with rage. "Sit down, Tyler," Clara said, calmly. "If you continue yelling and making threats, I will advise Evelyn to leave and we can let the sheriff handle the rest. No one wants that." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the word sheriff landed hard. He sank back on the couch, hands clenched. My father picked up the notice with stiff fingers as if it might burn him. "You would do this to us? You would really watch us pack up and walk out of here?" I didn't trust my voice, so I didn't answer right away. I looked around the room at the furniture I had helped pay for, the walls I had painted with my mother one weekend, the doorway where Tyler had once leaned and asked if I could cover just one more bill. I finally said, "I am watching you live in something I bought while you treat me like a stranger. I can't keep letting you use what I build to hurt me." My mother whispered my name, a small plea, but it didn't pull me at me like it used to. The thing that had always held me in place, the guilt and obligation, felt looser somehow. Sharon was still on the screen, calling me ungrateful, saying this is what happens when kids move to the city and forget where they came from. I reached over and ended the call with one tap. The room felt slightly quieter without her commentary. Clara told them that she would send copies of everything and that they could have their own lawyer review the documents if they wanted. She reminded them that no one had filed any criminal charges yet, but that could change if there was more unauthorized action on the cabin. There were more words after that. My mother tried to bargain. Tyler asked if there was any way this could go back to how it was. Megan muttered about me being cold and heartless. My father went through anger and insult and finally settled into a brittle silence. None of it changed what had already been laid out on the table. When there was nothing left to say that had not already been said, Clara picked up her bag. I told my parents we would be in touch about the repairs and the timeline. My mother reached for my arm and I stepped back just enough that her hand fell short. I walked to the front door, opened it, and felt the cooler air of the street hit my face. Behind me, I could hear voices rising again, the murmur of panic starting to grow as the reality of 30 days sank in. I stepped outside, closed the door gently but firmly, and started down the small path to the sidewalk. My chest ached, but underneath the hurt, there was something solid, something that felt a lot like finally standing on my own floor instead of theirs. Chapter 4. The Social Battlefield. Public Reversal and Karma. A few days went by where everything felt like it was humming just a little too loud in my head. I went back to work, showed up in the office, sat in meetings, gave feedback on designs. On the surface, nothing had changed. The city still moved the way it always did. Traffic on the bridges, people with iced coffee and earbuds, the occasional siren in the distance. Inside, that living room in Maple Grove and the stack of papers on my table followed me everywhere. It was a Thursday night when my phone started buzzing again. I was on my couch with my laptop open, trying to finish a proposal, when a notification from an old high school friend popped up. Then another one. Then a cluster of notifications from people I had not spoken to in years. They had all done the same thing, tagged me. I put the laptop aside and opened the app. The first thing I saw was a photo of my parents sitting on their porch, my mother holding a tissue, my father staring into the distance. The caption under it went on for several paragraphs, written by Megan. She had posted it publicly, not just to her friends. She wrote that she and Tyler had almost been homeless, that my parents were getting older and could not work the way they used to, that they had finally found stability in a house and the promise of a home at the lake. She said their own daughter had turned on them, served them with papers, and was kicking them out with nowhere to go. She used phrases like thrown into the street and betrayal by blood. She never mentioned forgery or the cabin deed or the years of me paying their way. In the comments, I saw familiar last names. Sharon had written that she always knew city life would turn me cold. Someone else said they were praying for my parents. A few people simply wrote things like disgusting and how can anyone do this to their own family? It felt like being shoved under cold water. Another notification came in, this time a private message from a woman I had not spoken to since community college. She wrote, "Evelyn, is that post about your parents true? I cannot picture you doing that, but I'm seeing it everywhere." I stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to throw my phone across the room and pretend none of it existed. Another part wanted to type a 10-page response to every single comment, line by line. Before I could do either, my phone rang. It was Linda. Her voice was careful in a way that told me she had already rehearsed what she wanted to say. She said, "I came across something online today. I do not want to pry, but it looked pretty personal. Are you all right?" I swallowed, feeling heat rise in my face, even though we were not in the same room. "I am dealing with some family fallout," I said. "Most of what is being said is missing a lot of context." She hesitated. "I understand families can be messy," she said. "I just need to know that if we move forward with our partnership, you will be able to keep the drama separate from the work. I have to consider the stability of our vendors." It hurt, but I couldn't even blame her. This was exactly the kind of bleed between personal and professional life I had always dreaded. "I can," I told her. "I will. I did not ask for this to go public, but I'm not going to let it derail what we built at Northline. If you need more time to decide, I understand." She said she would think on it, that she appreciated my honesty. When we hung up, I sat in the sudden quiet of my apartment and felt something inside me twist. It was one thing to have my family take advantage of me behind closed doors. It was another to have them light a match and throw it at my name in front of anyone with a screen. I called Clara. She answered on the first ring. "I take it you've seen the post." "Everyone has seen the post," I answered. "I have relatives I barely remember messaging me. Linda saw it. People at work are seeing my parents as victims and me as the villain." Clara went quiet for a moment. I could almost hear her weighing options. "You know they're counting on your silence," she said finally. "They're banking on you being too ashamed or too private to correct the record. That's how people like this keep control. They get the first story out." I leaned back against the wall and pressed the phone harder to my ear. "So what?" I asked. I start a comment war under my sisters-in-law's post? No, she said. You don't argue with her. You don't go into her space. You tell your own story on your own page, and you do it with facts. People love opinions until they see receipts. We agreed to meet the next day at my office instead of my apartment. It felt right to bring this mess into my space, the one I had built without them. In a conference room with the blinds half closed, we opened my laptop and started pulling files. Kara had already scanned the forged authorization and the damage report from Summit Ridge. I had the deed for the cabin, the closing statement from 2018 showing my name and only my name. We added photos of the torn open wall, screenshots of bank transfers, emails confirming payments for hospital bills and rent that my family had conveniently forgotten. Clara watched me as I dragged each file into a folder. "This is going to feel vulnerable," she said. "But you're not posting every painful detail. You're posting enough to show a pattern, a calm, clear statement with evidence. No insults, no emotional language. Anyone who wants to think can think. Anyone who wants to cling to the first story, you can't do anything about." I nodded, my throat tight. We drafted the post together. I typed while Clara paced slowly behind me, reading over my shoulder. I wrote that there had been a lot said recently about my relationship with my family and a house in Maple Grove and the cabin at Silver Pine Lake. I wrote that I did not want to drag private matters into public view, but that I also had a right to defend myself when half-truths and omissions were being used to paint me as a monster. Then I laid out the basics, that I bought the Maple Grove house in 2019 and had never taken a penny of rent, that I bought the cabin in 2018 with my own money, that construction crews had been brought in and my name had been signed on an authorization I never saw, that the damage estimate was $17,800, that I had paid medical bills and rent and car costs for almost a decade. I attached the deed, a redacted version of the bank transfers, the photos of the damage, and a cropped image of the forged authorization with my real signature displayed beside it. No names of relatives, no insults, no accusations beyond what the documents themselves showed. At the top, above everything, I added one simple line. Here is the truth. I stared at the cursor flashing at the end of the sentence. My heart was hammering the way it had before big presentations, but this felt different. This was not about closing a deal. This was about cutting away a lie. "You can still change your mind," Clara said softly. I hit post. The first few minutes, nothing happened. Then the likes and comments started to appear. At first, it was a trickle. A friend from college leaving a small message that said they were sorry I was going through this. A designer I had mentored writing that this didn't change how she viewed me as a boss. Then a few people I didn't recognize asking polite but pointed questions about why my parents would sign my name on a legal document without telling me. Someone shared the post back into the same small-town group where Megan had first written her version. Under that, a new thread began. People compared screenshots, looked at dates, asked out loud why none of the original story had mentioned me paying their bills for years. I watched in real time as the tide shifted, not in some fairy tale instant, not everyone at once, but slowly. One comment pulled another. Someone pointed out that eviction from a house your daughter owns after you forge her signature and destroy her property is not exactly being thrown into the street. Later, I learned that Sharon had gone back and quietly deleted her original angry share. A cousin messaged me privately to say they had removed their own comments and were thinking hard about things they had always assumed. Tyler texted once, a short, bitter line that said, "Enjoy the show." I didn't answer. The ripple effects spread out beyond family. A week later, Tyler's coworker from the warehouse followed me, and sent a short message apologizing for how people had talked about me in the break room before seeing the receipts. He said a few of them had stopped taking Tyler's version of events at face value. Megan posted less and less after my post went up. One day her online boutique page disappeared entirely. A friend from back home told me the company she had partnered with for drop shipping cut ties, saying they didn't want to be involved in ongoing public drama. My parents didn't call. Word traveled from person to person until it reached me that they had found a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of Spokane, in a complex with beige walls and no yard. For the first time in a long time, they had to write a rent check every month from their own account. One evening, while I was revising copy on a campaign, a new message slid into my inbox.
It was from Leonard. He wrote, "I saw some of what has been said online. I want you to know the neighbors up here saw what really happened. Your folks acted like they owned the place. The crew thought it was odd that your name was not on anything they gave them. If you ever need someone to back up your version, I'm here." I felt my eyes sting in a way they had not even in that living room. It was one thing to know the facts yourself. It was another to have someone outside the family see it and say, "I believe you." A day after that, my phone rang again with Linda's name on it. Her tone this time was different. "I read what you posted," she said, "and I read the comments. I am sorry I doubted you even for a second. You handled an ugly situation with a lot more grace than I think I would have. If anything, it makes me more confident about working with you. You did not lose your head in public." Relief washed through me in a slow, warm wave. "Thank you," I said. "I did not want this mess to touch the business, but I know I cannot always keep those worlds separate." "We all have families," she replied. "Some of them are just more dramatic than others. Let us talk about a new date for that presentation." When we hung up, I set my phone face down on the coffee table and leaned back against the couch. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt new. No buzzing with accusations, no moral lectures coming through a screen, no immediate fires to put out. I could still feel the bruise of what had been said about me, the sting of people believing the worst version first. But beneath that, something else was settling. Not victory, exactly. Not yet. More like the beginning of space. A small clearing in the noise where I could finally hear my own breathing again. Chapter 5. Healing, Freedom, and the Clean Ending. Fall came in slow this year, long enough for me to notice the leaves turning outside my apartment before the rain settled in. By the time the trees along my street in Portland were mostly bare, the contractor at Silver Pine Lake had finished their last punch list item, and the cabin was officially whole again. On a cool Friday morning in late October, I put a travel mug of coffee in the cup holder, tossed my laptop bag into the passenger seat, and pointed my car toward the mountains. The sky was that washed-out white that means the clouds have not decided whether they want to rain yet. Traffic thinned as the city fell away behind me, storefronts giving way to fields and fir trees. I had driven this route 100 times, but this time it felt different. For once, I was not racing out there to put out a fire someone else had lit. There was nothing to fix when I arrived, only something to reclaim. When I turned onto the familiar gravel road around Silver Pine Lake, my shoulders dropped an inch. The air felt cleaner, even through the cracked window. As the cabin came into view between the trees, I had to blink. After months of thinking of it as an open wound, seeing it intact again almost surprised me. The new siding matched the old wood closely enough that you would not notice the difference unless you knew where to look. The deck boards were clean and straight, the railings solid under my hands when I touched them. Inside, the living room had been put back exactly the way I asked for in the plans. Same layout, same windows,
just stronger bones behind the walls now. I set my bag on the small dining table, opened the curtains wide, and let the light in. For a few minutes, I just walked through the rooms, running my fingers along the tops of picture frames, the backs of chairs, every surface that had once felt invaded. It was quiet. No compressors, no raised voices, no people standing where they did not belong. I made another cup of coffee and opened my laptop. Waiting in my inbox was an email from Linda with a signed copy of the contract attached. She had added a short note telling me that her team was excited to work with us and that she appreciated how I had navigated the situation with my family. Jason and I had already talked through the next steps. The Whitfield contract meant real breathing room, not just survival. We had a timeline for hiring 2 more designers after the new year. We had a plan for opening a small satellite office up in Tacoma so I could spend more time between the city and the lake without sacrificing the business. For the first time since Northline started, my growth plan had me at the center of the equation, not my family. I worked for a couple of hours at the cabin table, the way I had meant to when I first bought the place. Campaign concepts, timelines, a few notes about next quarter. Work that used to feel heavy now felt almost simple compared to the last few months. In the afternoon, I heard tires on gravel. A few seconds later, someone knocked lightly on the door. I opened it to see Clara standing there in a soft sweater and jeans, holding a paper bag from a bakery and a bottle of wine. Her hair was pulled back in a way I had never seen outside her office, and for a moment I had to recalibrate. I was used to seeing her with a briefcase, not a weekend bag slung over one shoulder. She smiled and said she had decided to take me up on my open invitation to visit the lake before the weather turned. I stepped back to let her in, suddenly grateful for the warmth of another person who knew the whole story. We ate dinner at the small table, takeout containers spread between us, the lake dark outside the window. The heater hummed quietly, and for once I did not feel the urge to check my phone every few minutes. After we had finished and the plates were pushed aside, Clara leaned back and looked around the room. "This is how it was supposed to be for you," she said. "A place that is yours, not another thing you are sacrificing." I nodded. It was still a little strange to think of it that way, not as a resource to be shared until there was nothing left, but as a boundary line that said, "This is mine." We talked for a long time, the kind of conversation that wanders in circles and still feels like progress. She told me about other clients she had seen go through versions of what I had just survived. Parents taking out credit cards in their children's names, siblings forging documents to get access to insurance payouts, people who had to learn the hard way that blood was not a guarantee of safety. She said I had been carrying the emotional weight of my family since long before I started paying their bills. She wasn't accusing me. She was just naming it. At one point, she asked me a question I had been avoiding in my own head. She said, "If they called you, I mean really called, or showed up here and were actually sorry, not sorry they got caught, sorry for what they did, what would you do?" I stared at the wood grain on the table for a moment, tracing the lines with my eyes. "I think I would listen," I said slowly. "I would want to hear it. I just would not pack up my life and move it back inside their story again. I can't do the version where I pretend none of this happened." She nodded, as if that was enough of an answer for now. The next morning, the air outside the cabin was damp and chilly. Mist hovered low over the water. I wrapped my hands around a mug of coffee on the deck and watched a lone kayak cut across the far side of the lake. Clara was inside packing up her things. She had to get back to the city for a Monday court appearance. I heard the tires on gravel before I saw them, the small engine sound carrying over the quiet. Mail service out here was inconsistent, but when I saw the white truck stop by the row of boxes up the road, something in my chest tightened. Later, when I walked up the gravel shoulder and opened my box, there was only one piece of mail inside. It was an envelope with my name written on the front in my mother's careful, looping script. No return address, but I didn't need one. The weight of it in my hand felt heavier than paper should. Back at the cabin, I set it on the counter next to my coffee and just looked at it for a while. I could guess what was inside. Maybe a plea, maybe anger, maybe an attempt at guilt, maybe genuine regret. The not knowing pressed against me. I picked it up once, ran my thumb along the sealed flap, and then set it back down. For years, I had opened every phone call, every request, every emergency, as if I had no choice, as if the only version of being a daughter that counted was the one where I emptied myself out whenever someone else felt a lack. Standing in my own kitchen, in a cabin with walls that had been rebuilt stronger than before, I realized that I did have a choice now. I could decide when and how I let their words into my life. Maybe one day I would open that envelope. Maybe I would need to hear what they had to say. But not today. I wasn't ready to share this new quiet with whatever was inside that paper. I moved the letter to a small ceramic dish by the window, the one where I kept my keys, and went back to the deck. The wind off the lake was cool on my face. The water shifted gently, small ripples catching the light. The sounds were simple. A bird somewhere in the trees, the distant hum of a motorboat, my own breath going in and out. I thought about every version of family I had ever been shown. The ones in movies, flawless around holiday cables. The ones from small town gossip where loyalty meant never saying no, no matter what was asked. The one I had actually grown up inside, messy and demanding and always a little hungry. It occurred to me that for most of my life, I let those old definitions of family tell me who I was and what I owed. Every choice I made bent itself around them. School choices, job choices, money choices, all filtered through people who never had to live with the consequences the way I did. Looking out at the water, I let another definition take root. Family might be where you start, but it doesn't have to be the place you let define every boundary you have. The lines you draw for yourself, the ones that protect your peace and your sanity and your safety, those say just as much about who you are as any last name. For the first time, that thought didn't come with a wave of guilt. It just felt true. I stayed on the deck until the sun slipped lower and the air grew sharper, until my coffee went cold in my hands. When I finally went back inside, the cabin felt like what it was always supposed to be for me. Not a bargaining chip, not a prize to be taken, just a home that I chose and paid for and kept. If you were in that kind of situation, caught between keeping a fake harmony that eats at you and choosing your own peace even when other people call you selfish, I wonder which way you would go and what you would be willing to walk away